We're going to continue now with our analysis of Menachos. And let's just reiterate the last thing we said, just to complete yesterday's discussion and begin today with a new subject within Menachos. We were wondering about the status of a Minchas Kohenes. And we came to the conclusion that, at least according to one school of thought, the Minchas Kohenes really has the status of a regular Minchas Zar, a non-Kohen, and it doesn't have the status of a Minchas Kohen. But here it breaks down to two possibilities. She's either single or she's married. And what that means is that if we give the paradigm of Truma, you could have a woman who eats Truma because she was born to a Kohen, her father's a Kohen. Let's call her a single girl. Or alternatively, you could have a girl who's born to a non-Kohen, but she marries a Kohen, and she eats Truma as well. Now, what's the difference between the two, which is Bas Kohen or Ashes Kohen, with regard to a mincha, carbon mincha? We'll take, for example, a minchas chote. So we said that if we were to talk about a minchas Kohen, then it's kulo kolil, meaning the balance or the shirayim after the kmitza cannot be eaten by any Kohen. It has to be burnt on the mizbeach. Now, in the case of an Ashes Kohen who brings a mincha, the halacha requires kmitza, and we're going to burn on the mizbeach the balance, the shirayim of that mincha after the kmitza. That doesn't make any sense, because if you're telling me that, I understand very well that if the Ashes Kohen, when she brings a mincha, her mincha has the status of a minchas Kohen, then we cannot allow for the eating of the shirayim, because the minchas Kohen is kulei kolei. And yet, the Gemara establishes that efshal laktiron, that we cannot be maktir the shirayim on the mizbeach. That means that the Ashes Kohen l'chora doesn't have the status of a kohanes as far as her mincha, the status of her mincha is concerned. So what we're going to say is the following: that mispazrim shirel mispazrim bebeis hadesh. We have a real bein hashmashos, a real paradox of a situation. We're not going to allow for the eating of the shirayim because she's an Ashes Kohen. And from one perspective, this mincha is being brought by her husband as well, not just by her. She's dependent upon her husband financially, and therefore he's also the bailam of the korban. So it's impossible to eat the shirayim because the minchas Kohen is kulei kolei. On the other hand, she's the primary mover over here. She was the chote. It's her korban, and therefore we should be eating the shirayim like any korban mincha, minchas chote of a zar, of a non-kohen. So in and of herself, if not for the fact that she's married to a kohen, she's not a kohenes, and it's a mincha of a zar, and we'd have to eat the shirayim, but we can't eat the shirayim because she's married to a kohen, and it becomes a minchas kohen. So therefore, shirel mispazrin bebeis hadeshin. We can't eat it. We can't be makter it. We have to wait until to Ubar Tzuroson, and then we spread it around in the Beis Hadesh. However, here, and I think this is where we stopped yesterday, we have a Chiddush of the Yerushalmi, which is quoted by Tosfos in Masechta Menachos. And the Yerushalmi says the following. When we talk about the mincha of an Eishes Kohen, we should divide it up into two categories. One is the generic category that includes almost all categories of mincha, and that's neder, nedava, minchas chote, and the other category is going to be minchas sota. And according to the Yerushalmi, the tzad, the possibility that we were considering that the mincha of an Eishes Kohen has the status of a minchas Kohen because her husband, is the bailam of the korban, and hence we will not allow for the eating of the shirayim. That only applies, says the Yerushalmi, to a minchas sota. In the case of a minchas sota, her husband, no less than she, is obligated in bringing this mincha. The mincha is a joint mincha of husband and wife. Again, when I say husband and wife, in this case, the marriage is a little bit on the rocks, but in any event, that's the mincha sota. In this case, her husband, who's a Kohen, has a major hold on that karba mincha. He is the bailam no less than she is. Hence, we cannot allow for the achila of the shirayim after the kmitza because it's a minchas Kohen, which is kulei kolit. However, in the other menachos that an Eishes Kohen brings, for example, a minchas chote, if she was guilty of a sin, or a neder or a nedava, here the shirayim will be eaten after the kmitza, because basically what we have here is the mincha of a zar. She's a zar. She was not born to a Kohen. Her father is not a Kohen. She married a Kohen, but it's her korban, it's not his korban. And therefore, according to the Yerushalmi, the halacha is that neder, nedava, u'minchas chote shel Eishes Kohen, eina nechsheves minchas Kohen, v'shireo nechol. We can eat the shirayim. The only thing that we didn't cover, we didn't address, is the question of a bas Kohen, who's a pnuya. In that case, I would say that the shirayim are nechalim because she does not have that status of a Kohen. She's a bas Kohen, but she's not a Kohen. She can't do the avoda in the mikdash. So when we talk about the special gzeres hakos that a minchas Kohen is completely burnt on the mizbeach kulo kolil, that's a Kohen who serves in the Beis Hamikdash. But a bas Kohen, in and of herself, she has the status of a zar. Her mincha, therefore, the shirayim of the mincha will be eaten. Okay, now we start a brand new topic, which I'm a little bit familiar with. In Menachos, I'm a rookie, except for Minchas HaOmer. Okay. Now, when we study Minchas HaOmer, we should keep in mind that we're about to embark upon a major branch of Menachos, which is called Minchas HaTzibur. So the first category of Minchas HaTzibur that we're dealing with today is Minchas HaOmer. Because Until now, we've been discussing either a mincha that comes as a neder, or as an adava, or as a result of chet. Those are all minachos of the yachid. And we broke it down into many categories, minchas chavitin, and we spoke about mafetanur, and marcheshes, and machvas. I mean, all those were subcategories of a minchas yachid. Now we're on to minchas tzibur, the first category. The first subcategory of minchas tzibur is minchas ha'omer. On the morning after the first day of Yontif, the minchas ha'omer is brought in the Beis HaMikdash. That's the 16th day in the month of Nisan. And it's very unique in that this mincha comes from Siorim. We'll talk about minchas sota also from Siorim, but in terms of every other mincha that comes from Chita, the exception is going to be minchas ha'omer, and the Torah requires minchas siorim, which we translate today as barley. But here's the catch. We can't just bring barley grains, cut down the grains of barley from the field and bring them on the 16th of Nisan as the minchas ha'omer. We need to take the barley from the new tvuah, from this year's crop, and we go out to the fields and we cut off a stalk of barley. We'll see exactly how many stalks we're going to cut. And this is the first ktsira, the first harvest of the new crop, the new season's crop of barley. That's going to be the minchas ha'omer. So the very first sa'ora that's brought in the mikdash is the minchas ha'omer. The Mishnah codifies that if this omer was not brought min hachadasha, but rather min ha'yishana, then the mincha is psula. We have to replace it. However, although in the Mishnah there is no dissenting opinion recorded, but in a brisa which is quoted by the Gemara, b'di eved, if it wasn't chadash, the omer, the minchas omer, will be kshera, even if they used yashan from last year's crop. But everybody agrees that l'chatchila, the mitzvah requires that the ktsira for the omer should be a ktsira of tvuah chadasha. This year's tvuah, not last year's tvuah, but this year's tvuah. Not only that, there's another dimension to the mitzvah. You don't just take a tractor out in, up in Dan or down in Beersheba and cut off the ball. But rather, it's got to be min hakarov lYerushalayim, outside the city limits of Yerushalayim. However, that's again another dimension of the ideal mitzvah of minchas ha'omer. B'di eved, any tvuah of barley, of siora min hachadash from this year's crop, no matter where you took it from, is kshera. However, one thing is crystal clear. The omer has to be taken from Eretz Yisrael. We cannot import barley, even from this year's new crop, from any of the other countries. And in fact, the Mishnah in Caleb, when it wants to demonstrate the special, unique Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, it mentions this halacha that Ein ha'omer ba ela mi'Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's included in Eretz Yisrael? We have many different boundaries. We have, for example, the boundaries that were given to Avraham Avinu, which are much, much larger than any other boundaries. They include Kini, Kvit, and different nations out there. Then we have the boundaries of Moshe Rabbeinu when he began a process with Joshua completed, and under his leadership, they conquered the land of Ammon and Moab, which is called Aver HaYarden. Here we have a gigantic controversy about what is the status of the Tvua that grew in Aver HaYarden as far as the mitzvah of Omer is concerned. Two contesting opinions. Then we talk about Yoshua, who crosses the Yarden, and he harvests the Tvua of Eretz Yisrael. The only problem is Bayis Sheni, because the boundaries of Bayis Sheni, when Ezra and Nehemiah came back after the 70 years between Bayis Rishon destruction and the 7, that was a much more restricted area that was sanctified by Ezra, Nehemiah, and Aliyah Shniya, the second Commonwealth, as they call it. So we'll have a whole issue about whether during Bayis Sheni they could bring the Omer from the south, like from Aza, for example. We don't have Aza today, but not long ago, you remember that we had Aza. Rabbi Yossi, where Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa in Menachos Pei Daled is of the opinion, again, this is a very minute dissenting opinion, a minority opinion, that Ha'omer ba'af michutz la'aretz. So we would have to see the Sugi of Rabbi Yossi, but we don't accept that, and we require that the Omer come from Eretz Yisrael. Next, what happens if a non-Jew owns a field in Eretz Yisrael? This is going to be relevant to Shemitah, but in terms of the mitzvah of Omer, can we take Omer from a non-Jewish plantation? And it all depends. At what point in the development, in the maturation process of this Ktsir Omer, did we actually harvest the Omer? Ein meviim es ha'omer misiorim she'eviu shlish b'rshus nochri. If the Siora reached 1/3 of its development, and it's in the field, and it's growing in the field of a guy, it's excluded from the Omer. Shekei Nemar, the pasuk says, "Reishis Ktsir Chem." It's got to be your Ktsir, below Ktsir Noch. I don't understand what's going on here, I'll be honest with you, because the implication here is that if you were to cut off the Siora from the field of Sadav and Nachri before it reached Shlish, then it would be kosher for the Omer. But I don't get it. The Torah says, Uktsarten. And there's no Ktsira before Shlish. I mean, again, you could do a physical, take a sickle and cut it down, but I'll be in, we don't qualify something as Ktsira unless it reached at least the minimum maturation of a shlu. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the ktsira of the Omer. Until now, we spoke about the hakrova, the carbon Omer, but we need a ktsira in order to obtain an Omer Siora for the Mincha. And we'll soon see that the Ktsir is at night, whereas the Hafah is during the day. But before we get to that, What about lishma? With regard to karbanos, we have a whole sugya at the beginning of Zvachim, whether we need lishma, we don't need lishma. But what about the ktsira itself? Does the ktsira have to be implemented for the express purpose, the intention of bringing it as a karban minchas ha'omer? Mitzvah lahavius ha'omer mikama shadayin lo niktzor kedei shetehei ktsirasa l'shem ha'omer. It's not enough that you have a ktsir of siora, even if it's from the Tuach Hadasha. That doesn't qualify for the mitzvah of minchas ha'omer. We need to do the ktsira. The fact that it was cut down and I have it, that's not enough. I need the ktsira. Why is that so? Because I need lishma. The ktsira has to be for the express intention of bringing it as the karban ha'omer. Im lo matzu min hakemach, I'm sorry, min hakama. Mevim mi omrim shekvar niktzeru. We're now on page Hey, shelo lishma. And again, we come to this distinction between that which is absolutely critical and that which is ideal. And now we have another dimension of that which is ideal in order to fulfill the mitzvah, but is not critical. In its absence, it's still called. And that's lishma. Lishma is ideal. Go out and cut down this omer of siora for the sake of the omer. But the Eved, they only found something that was cut down. Shalo lishma. We can use it if necessary. And the mincha will be ksher. Now, there are another few details here about the siora that we're cutting down for the sake of minchas ha'omer. Number one, mitzvah lavio misaorim lachos. It should be moist and fresh and not dried up and withered up. Shenemar b'omer, yeresh karmel. What does the word karmel mean? I mean, if I said the word Carmel to you, you might think of Haifa, you might think of the Carmel Forest, you might think of a boutique hotel called the Carmel Hotel. I mean, many things will come to mind. You might even think of a friend of yours whose name is Carmel or Carmieli. Or you may think of a city where my son and his family live called Carmiel. Anyway, the word Carmel means many things to many people. But here the Gemara says it's a notrika, which means that we take apart this word that only has 4 letters to it, and we interpret it as if there would it's more than one word. That's notrika. And we read it as rach mal. Now this is really interesting because you take the first 2 letters, which is chaf resh of Carmel, and you turn them around. So you read it rach. Second half of the word Carmel is mem lamed. We read it as mal. So what does that mean? Rach mal. Rach mal means tvua raka. Rach is raka. It's soft. And it's soft because it's still moist. How soft is it? Nimleles biyad, right? We use the word rach, first 2 letters, to indicate that it's moist. And the second 2 letters, mem lamed, means that it lends itself to melila biyad. Melila is when you take a kernel and you rub it and you remove the chaff from the kernel. So that's called melila. Once again, this is only ideal. This is mitzvah, lo matzu, lachos, yaviu min evations. They can still bring the minchas ha'omer, even if this new crop is all dried up. Now, we introduce the ktsira itself. The first element that we have to address is Shabbos. We have halacha that karbanos override the Shabbos. And there's no doubt that the minchas homer is not an exception. it will fit into the general rule. And for the sake of the Hakrava, the Mincha on Shabbos, if that's Tezayin B'Nisan falls on Shabbos, we will be Makrivan on Shabbos. But what about the Ktsira? The Ktsira is a preliminary stage that sets up the Karma. Does Ktsiras HaOmer override the Shabbos? Now, on this we have a great controversy between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Chachamim hold that you can't get to the Mincha and Akrava without Ktsira. And therefore Ktsira is Docha Shabbos. And Rebbe holds that Ktsira is not Docha Shabbos. Which means, according to Rebbe, that if Tesayim B'Nisan falls on a Shabbos, we're going to have to get a good deep freezer. We're going to do the Ktsira before Shabbos, and we're going to have to freeze it in a way that it remains fresh and moist for Shabbos day when we bring the Karban Minchas HaOmer. The Krav itself is Afilu B'Shabbos, and now that Afilu B'Tumah, because now we're dealing with the Karban Tzibur. And a Karban Tzibur has special halachas vis-a-vis Shabbos and Tumah. And with regard to all Karban Tzibur that have a special man, a time urgency, they override the Shabbos. The Omer is no different. Now, the next section, which Mitzvah Shem will leave for tomorrow, deals with the nitty-gritties of Ktsiras HaOmer, exactly how they did it, how they gathered together the Omer of Siora, and the question is, could they do it on Erev Yom Tov? The timing of it, all that in Mitzvah Shem we'll pick up tomorrow. So we've now embarked on this project of Minchas HaOmer.